Welcome to today's webinar presenting the top 5 strategies to prevent ransomware attacks. Thank you all for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules. Today's webinar is brought to you by KnowBe4, the world's largest provider of security awareness training and simulated phishing. My name is Holger Schulze. I am the founder and CEO of Cybersecurity Insiders, the 400,000 member online community for cybersecurity professionals, and I'll be your moderator today. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our featured presenter, Eric Krohn. Eric is security awareness advocate at KnowBe4, and he is a veteran information security professional with over 20 years experience in the medical, aerospace, manufacturing, and defense fields. All right, Eric, welcome to the program.
All right, thank you very much, Holder. I really appreciate it. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a fun little presentation here. We're going to talk about strategies to prevent these attacks and to prevent how they spread. It's kind of an interesting thing, we read sometimes that ransomware is on the decline, et cetera, but what I will say is, although the sheer volume of attempted attacks are down, so are the little $300 to $500 per machine sorts of ransomware things. What's happened essentially is we've replaced those many small attacks with ones that are much more damaging and devastating to organizations, right? So instead of just the real quick, easy stuff, the attacks that are doing this are pretty ugly. All you have to do is ask the poor folks over in Atlanta how that's working out. They were obviously devastated by this, and we see this over and over again across a lot of these industries. So I implore that you don't underestimate what ransomware is doing these days. Cryptocurrency is out there too. Many of these, the things that we're going to talk about here, are going to help with the crypto miners. This is going to help with those as well, because a lot of times that's their goal, is to spread to other machines as well. So that being said, a little bit about myself. I've been in this since mid 1990s now. I feel so old when I talk about that. But I spent about 10 years with the Department of Defense, with the U.S. Army there in the U.S. Army's 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere. That was an organization that did the kind of the network backbone and Active Directory for the Army across all of North America. So I spent about 10 years there. What's interesting about this is throughout my career, over and over again, I've noticed the trend that when people are attacked, when the humans are attacked in here, the success rate of these attacks are much higher. And I've seen many different ways that these attackers try to social engineer their ways into places. Regardless of the industry, this is a very hot topic here. So that's of course why I am an advocate of security awareness training, right? If done right, it does it has a big impact on your overall security posture. Now, a quick little bit about ourselves. KnowBe4, we're out of Tampa, Florida area here, about 20,000 customers strong. Been around since 2010 and just growing leaps and bounds. What we do, we provide a security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. So the idea is help teach your users how to be more secure, have better password habits, all of those kinds of things. And then to be able to test them with simulated phishing emails, where if they do mess up, it's in a safe environment, right? That's much better than seeing your network burn when they mess up on the real emails. So that's what we do. We also get the privilege, I guess it's a privilege, of hearing the stories of when things go wrong. Far too often organizations come to us after they've been breached rather than before. And so we get to hear those, oh, well, this is what happened, that led to this. That's where a lot of the information we're sharing here comes from, is things that we've seen, things that we've heard, things that we've witnessed with customers and non-customers alike. So we're going to start out a little bit with the numbers behind ransomware, because it's kind of shocking how this has been growing, right? Ransomware is definitely one of those things that again, we have to keep an eye out for. And some people don't understand just how big the numbers are here, right? So, you know, if you look at 2016, 2017, ransomware grew over 300% in those years. It's still growing, and it's predicted to reach damages of over $11.5 billion by 2019, right? And interestingly enough, I was just talking about this with Holder here. Mobile ransomware, we're seeing a push on that. It's not all that successful now, but I want people to understand that this is something that the attackers are still going for. Okay, and when they get their hands in there and when they are able to get into the mobile devices, I think we're going to see a pretty significant event when that happens. I think it's going to be a pretty major kind of where were you when event when that happens. We see some other numbers here, you know, ransomware price tags jumping. That's nothing new. You know, over and over throughout the years. What's interesting about this, and this is still very true, a typical attack takes 32 hours of labor to resolve. It's very interesting. People don't understand the amount of effort that goes into just a very simple ransomware attack. You got the man hours of the person that's standing there that's not able to do their work while their machine is down. You have your IT folks trying to fix it, you know, either clean up the infection or my preference, which is nuke it from orbit, reinstall everything, and move on. But that all takes time, and time costs money, right? So even if we're not seeing it reported that much, even if we've gotten it to where, you know, not every small little ransomware event hits the news, understand that the amount of labor and man hours that are going into this is pretty significant. We've also seen a number of things where they can't even get their information back if they pay. And that's where it gets really ugly, right? Not petcha, something that you didn't recover from, right? We see this in, there's some new strains that are out there right now. XBash, if you've heard of that, this is an amazing little one here. It actually works on Linux or Windows, and it launches differently depending on what operating system it goes on. In Linux, it actually does a ransomware behavior and installs kind of as a botnet. So there's command and control stuff there. On Windows, the same one there does cryptocurrency mining and tries to spread itself throughout the organization. So here's a strain that does different things on different machines with different operating systems. The innovation, what's going on here is pretty strong. And the other thing about XBash is even if you pay, there's no way to get your data back. There is nothing there that is going to allow them to do it. It is not capable of decrypting your files. So again, that last bullet there is something that we see time and time again. It used to be that ransomware vendors really worked hard to have good customer service to make sure that people knew that they would get their data back because, well, that's what you do if you want people to pay, right? But then what happened is a lot of people came in and they built these strains that don't have any of the supporting infrastructure for key exchange and all that stuff that goes on there. And they rode on the backs of those ransomware reputations of you will get your data back. And quite frankly, you just can't. So they were making their money off that. And it was just a big scam very often, right? We've seen shifts from Bitcoin to Monero because the price of Bitcoin had become so unstable. These sorts of things were going on there. There's lots of different ways that they're trying different things with ransomware. For example, I don't know if many of you remember, there was a strain called Popcorn Time not too long ago. Popcorn Time would infect your machine. It would pop up the screen and it would tell you, your files have been encrypted. This is what you got to pay. If you don't want to pay, send this link to other people. If you can get 2 people infected and they pay, I'll give you your data back free. Let that sink in for a second, right? That's like a Ponzi scheme of ransomware, okay? But again, they're trying anything they can to get in there. This innovation is not stopping. So don't let your guard down on this. So knowing the enemy, we've seen ransomware in different stages throughout the years. One of the latest trends that I think we need to be careful with is this. It's called ransomware as a service. All right. It's designed to let people that aren't technical set up attacks. They don't have all the knowledge to do the infrastructure, none of that. And basically what happened is these malware developers said, you know what, we're going to start offering this as a service. There's already software as a service and infrastructure as a service, all that kind of good stuff. We want to be part of that. So one of the first really good ones I saw was Philadelphia. Last I saw, it's still available at about $380 for a lifetime license. Completely reconfigurable. You can change anything on it. It does Russian roulette, where occasionally, if you haven't paid, it'll just start deleting files. You can set up the timer for that, all that kind of good stuff, right? About $380 for a lifetime license of that. There's actually a YouTube video out there that shows you all of the customizable features. It's an advertisement for this, right? Pretty crazy. But then they moved into this profit splitting model. And what you'll notice is Cerber there is one of the ones. We've seen that as a non-RAS strain. They've actually ported it over to a RAS model. And now they're doing a 70-30 affiliate malware developer split, meaning if the attackers take this and it costs them absolutely nothing to get, if they infect people, they get 70% of the profits, the developers get 30%. The attackers don't have to know anything. The developers take care of all of the back-end stuff all the way down to the cryptocurrency management. It's pretty crazy. And that little blurb down there was from Bleeping Computer. That's from Saturn right there, and it's explaining how that works, where they're selling this on the dark web. This is one of the reasons I think this isn't going to go away. I think that we're going to see more and more of these sorts of attacks. And I think that what we're going to do is we're going to end up having people that aren't really technical being able to get into this game. They don't have morals. They're con artists. They're scammers traditionally, but they didn't know how to put that infrastructure together for ransomware. Well, now they get to play the game. So we're going to break these down a little bit. Top 5 strategies to prevent ransomware and ransomware attacks. Okay, these are these are all things that apply to a number of different things as well. But with respect to ransomware, this is what we've seen helps people avoid paying that money, and that's really where it comes down to it. Where the rubber meets the road, if you will, is when it's time to decide what do we do? Can we recover from this quickly, or do we have to pay out? Something I do want to advise people about too is understanding what it means to pay out, understanding what these attacks can cost you, regardless of your payment side there. Again, first of all, you may not get the data back anyways, but second of all, if these cause a major disruption, you can open your organization up to other things. For example, allscripts.com, they do some back-end stuff for doctors' offices, things like that. Your doctor sends a prescription to your Walgreens or CVS or whatever your pharmacy is. A lot of times that's done through Allscripts on the back end. They got hit by ransomware. They were down for well over a week, completely down. Impacted a whole lot of doctors, offices. They're now subject to a class action suit for damages caused by that. So not only was it the cost of loss of business and all that kind of stuff, now they're facing a class action suit. So please take this stuff very, very seriously, right? Now, the first one here, this is our number one suggestion because it does work. Train your users. Most of these attacks happen through phishing, through some sort of a social engineering attack. They get people to click a link or open an infected document. Next thing you know, this thing is spreading throughout your network. More often these days, we see stuff that is network aware as opposed to just infecting that one workstation. So that receptionist getting hit with ransomware can very easily start this chain within your organization, much like it did with WannaCry and the NHS. This sort of a chain reaction and the spreading can be devastating. So we need to understand training your users to spot these attacks where people are trying to trick them into clicking links or open documents. Everybody in your organization is susceptible to this. It really doesn't matter who it is. They're susceptible to these sorts of attacks because, again, these guys are pretty good at getting in the front door and then pivoting. And we'll talk about some of the other things here to help to avoid that, right? we really recommend that not only do you have them identify, but also report the suspected phishing attacks. What this does is this helps people get kind of a heads up. If you're being targeted by a phishing campaign and you get, say, 3, 4, 5 people that report this this particular email within, let's say, an hour or 30 minutes, however whatever you feel comfortable with, depending on your organization, it's a good indicator that you're being attacked, right? So what you do is block it at the email gateway, remove it from the email servers, filter it out like that. So now maybe only 20% of your employees were exposed to the attack. It sat in their inbox. You were able to remove it before they had a chance to action on it. It's a great way to get an early warning. It's sort of a sensor, if you will. Now, when it comes to doing this, there's a couple ways to do that. Number one, a lot of people use an email address, just forward it to that. Unfortunately, that means people have to think about it. There are some tools available. We actually have one. It's free. You don't have to be a customer or anything. It's called the Phish Alert button. If you suspect, or if your user suspects it's a phishing email, they hit that button. It's going to wrap it up with the headers and everything and send it to someone in your organization to take a look at. It's highly recommended that you give them a way to report things. That gives you, again, more of an idea of what's going on, what attacks are happening to you. The second thing, weapons grade backups. I cannot say this enough too. The 1 and 2 things here, it's 1, 2 blows. If you fix these 2 things, you're going to have the biggest impact. Train the users and have good backups. Okay. Backups don't do any good if they're encrypted. So make sure they're not on the network. We've heard that story so many times where the backups are in a network accessible location. When the ransomware gets launched, it goes out there, it finds that network accessible location and encrypts those files too. So how do you restore from that sort of a backup? You don't, right? And I've had people ask me a lot, well, what if you encrypt your backups? Will it still be encrypted? Yes, it will. So make sure it's isolated from the network. Whatever your backup server is doing, make sure it's going to maybe a network that only that machine can reach. If that's an option, just make sure they're not on a share. Now, the 3-2-1 rule is fantastic. 3 copies of the data, 2 different types of media, keep 1 copy off-site. Now, with the 2 different types of media, I do include cloud in there if you understand what you're doing. So replication and backups are 2 very different things. Don't rely on Dropbox. Don't rely on things that are just designed to replicate what's on your machine, because if you're infected there, it may replicate it up there. We've even seen strains that go after these sorts of cloud-based replication services and try to delete all of the previous versions of the documents beforehand. They know that trick, and unfortunately people have been burned by that quite a bit. The other thing is you need to understand how long it takes to restore your data. Even if you can restore it, it may take you longer than you expect. So you need to test this. I like to say at least twice a year, do a full restore of the vital data. Make sure you can actually get it back. At least once a month, pick some of the most critical data, ensure you can restore it. In other words, you're going to go and randomly select some critical data. Make sure you can get it back. Make sure you can get it back in a timely fashion. Those are important things. And you may run across things like you realize that, oh, wait, we don't have enough drive space to actually restore this stuff. That may be something that you have to consider, because sometimes when you're recovering from one of these, one of the things we like to say is, if at all possible, save those encrypted files. There may be a decryptor released later, and if you have already deleted those files, you may never get that stuff back, right? So it's important to kind of understand how long that takes and what the impact is. And again, make sure you test them. Now, I know I just heard a recent story about Merck, that the shipping company that got hit with NotPetya, right? And what they did, they had their domain controllers all backing up to each other, and their domain controllers were all good. When they got hit, it actually took out all of those boxes. They could not get to any of their backups. What really saved them was they had one domain controller and I want to say it was in like Ghana, that had the site had happened to be offline due to a power outage, and their UPS had failed. So that one domain controller escaped being encrypted, and that's what they were able to restore the rest of them from. Had they not had that oops with the UPS and with that, they would have been in a whole lot worse shape. As it stands, it took them a couple of months to fully recover. So that's something to consider. Make sure you know what you're backing up to. Make sure you know how that sort of stuff is happening, right? I can't emphasize this enough. Test those things. Now, the next one, segmenting the network. This would have made WannaCry go from taking out the NHS to being a minor inconvenience, quite frankly. The idea behind segmenting the network is making sure that only those computers that need to talk to each other can talk to each other. We're talking about subnets, we're talking about all that kind of good stuff, right? You know, my example here, marketing computers or your receptionist machine rarely need to have network access to a SQL server, right? If your receptionist can get to a login screen on a SQL server that's in production, you have a pretty significant problem there, probably even if one's not in production. So you need to look at that sort of thing. What happens here is if say this receptionist gets infected, they click that link, they launch that malware, and it tries to go around to all these places, it's going to be limited how far it can spread. So you may have one segment of your network that's completely infected, but the rest of your organization can run cleanly. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it's important to do. It also helps on traditional means. If a bad actor gets in there, if an attacker gets in and takes over that machine, they can't use it to pivot to other things. You know, crypto mining software, it wants to get on as many of your machines as possible, use your resources to mine cryptocurrency for them. If you can limit how many they get to, it makes cleanup and repair so much easier. So try to limit the ports. Try to limit any communications that don't need to be there for that. It does require some planning. It does require some of that, but it is well worth it in the long run to contain things to maybe 5 or 10 machines as opposed to 150 or 200, including your production stuff. Now, the next one is kind of similar to that. It's the principle of least privilege. And I know this is a baseline thing. If you're a CISSP, you are used to this phrase, but it's important to understand that like the network segmentation, not everyone should have access to all the data. So, for example, let's take our receptionist again as an example here. If that receptionist can get to, say, if you have like an S drive, a shared drive, and it has accounting folders, if that receptionist can get into those folders and read and write in that stuff, they can encrypt it. So ransomware typically launches in the context of the user that launched it, whether that be through opening a document or a link. It's going to run in that context. And if that person has modify rights on a file, they can encrypt that file. If they have read-only rights on that file, they cannot encrypt that file. So by limiting the access now through the OS as well, you can limit how far things can spread and how much damage can be done. If they don't need access to it, really, really try to remove that. You know, local admin accounts, it's 2018, folks. Very rarely is there a need to have a local admin on a machine, like have that user be that. You should not be checking email on a machine where you're a local user, where you're a local admin. It's entirely too easy these days to, you know, elevate your permissions and then use a substitute account for that, right? But again, you should not be using anything that has admin, especially on your network, to be checking emails. And something that people do tend to forget about is service accounts and the privileges that those hold a lot of times. If I'm an attacker and I can get in your network and I can, you know, go hammer on a service account for a while, in many cases, odds are that service account has not changed in a long time. That password's been there for a while. They may not be monitored for brute force attacks. And not only that, most importantly, that service account password is very likely shared across many of the other machines in your environment, right? So we need to be careful about what privileges we give those service accounts. It is very easy when you're trying to set something up to go, okay, it's not working. Okay, I'm going to give this service account domain admin privileges. Oh, look, it works. Okay, and you leave it like that. It happens all the time. I've seen this happen more often than I care to talk about. But we have to be very careful when we're doing that sort of thing, okay? And then number 5, keep up with patches. Now, we all heard this, and I know it's frustrating, and I know it's really easy to stand on a soapbox and say, why didn't you patch? I can tell you that throughout my career and my history, I've seen, especially in the medical side, where you may have an MRI machine that does fantastic imaging. The machine running it is Windows XP, and they've been acquired by 17 different people in the last 12 months. There is never going to be a patch for that machine. You cannot upgrade the OS. It's just not going to happen. But the imaging is fantastic. So why would you throw out millions of dollars in equipment for that? In those cases, when you know you can't patch, you need to remember those when it comes to the mitigation part, right? Limit those boxes so they can only talk to 1 or 2 other machines on the network, okay? Severely limit where they can communicate. Remember them when patches do come out, because sometimes you can mitigate through other things as opposed to necessarily having to apply this patch that breaks that software, right? Look for other options and really start trying to work into your organization where patching becomes a priority with a well-tested process, not just an annoyance. And that comes through trial and error, quite frankly. We, in an organization I was at, we had challenges with patching. And it wasn't until we took it seriously and said, this is something that we really need to be doing better. We can't just keep kicking the can down the road. It caused us some pain a little bit in the beginning, but once we understood how that worked, how everything played, what machines we could shut off while we were doing this to make sure that everything was functional, and then apply the patches to the redundant machines. Once we figured that out, actually it became fairly easy to do, and the results were fairly they were something that we could see coming. It wasn't always a surprise. Oh, I applied this patch, and look, that corner of the domain went down. We were able to see those things coming, and it was predictable at that point. So remember that. Even if you can't patch, try to mitigate the risk through other controls. If a machine is running SMB v1 and it doesn't need SMB connections, maybe you shut down SMB v1 to that machine. Block it at a firewall, block it at on an OS firewall. Just shut it down that way. Or maybe you consider other ways that you can transfer files if you do need to go to a file transfer process, something that is less likely to be exploited, right? So when it comes to the user side, this is a tricky part for some of us. Many of us here, unfortunately, we were not hired for our roles in technology because of our ability to train people. And it's tough. It's not where our core competency is. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's really not where a lot of us want to be working, right? I'm a sucker for blinky boxes. I'm that guy who at home, I have an R710 running under a dresser upstairs. I kid you not. My wife loves that kind of stuff, right? Rack servers under every dresser. I really love the technology piece. When it comes to training users, that was not always my favorite thing to do. And it was also not something that I was great at doing, if I'm honest with myself. I get in there and I start talking about these things, and I want to get technical about it. And the people in accounting, they really don't care about packet headers. We found that out the hard way. I mean, this is one of those things where I had to be honest. So what I'm about to share with you is some things that I've learned, that we've seen work when it comes to dealing with these users and getting them ready for battle, right? And if you don't think this is a battle, I would say think again. Many of us use email on our phones. That means basically from the time we wake up bleary-eyed and unplug from the charger and read our first email message to the time we put that thing back on the charger at night and set our phone down, we're under attack. these phishing attacks are coming in. And one of the stats I saw recently, I believe it was from Symantec, on average, in June of 2018, there were 1.7 billion phishing emails sent per day. 1.7 billion per day. Make no mistake, people are being attacked constantly. Now, when we do training, a lot of times we fall into this thing where, you know, we try to do the compliance piece and move on. It's got to be a comprehensive program, right? We've got to be taking this seriously. And what happens is doing the training once a year is not going to fix things, all right? So what we want to do is we want to have like a constant drip of training. And what we recommend is do your annual training, maybe a 45-minute training, something like that, right? Teach them all those things, the password hygiene. You know, don't be the guy in the newscast from the Hawaii area there after that. Remember that missile launch scare that went out? And then they did the interview and they've got the password on a Post-it note on the monitor, right? Let's not be those guys. Work on that sort of stuff. Put that out in the annual. Then what you do is maybe quarterly, put out a 3 to 5 minute micro module, especially one that's got context for what's happening or what's coming up. Like first quarter, we always know that tax stuff is a hot topic in first quarter that the phish people, these attackers, are using to get to people, right? W-2 fraud, all those kinds of things. So why not, you know, maybe in the third quarter, start talking about that. Send them out something that's related to these sorts of business email compromise or W-2 fraud types of scams. So they're ready for it when they really do start rolling in the first quarter. So think about that, doing the smaller pieces along with the major one. The other thing that happens is combining these with the simulated phishing attacks helps keep them on their toes the whole time. It does a couple of things. First of all, it gives them a healthy sense of paranoia. So in other words, when those emails come through and there's something a little bit weird about them, it kind of triggers that something's not right here. They're able to look at that and they're able to go, you know, something's a little off on this. I wonder if this is one of those ones the IT folks are sending me or whatever. And then they're going to report it, right? Or delete it or whatever. But they're constantly vigilant about what's coming in because they always think it may be one of those ones from you. So that's what I like to call a healthy dose of paranoia. The second thing it does, and to me this is just as important or maybe even more important than the paranoia, it gives them a chance to take what we taught them in the training and practice it in real life. And not only that, in a fail-safe environment. So again, these folks, they get that email, they get a phishing email, they go, you know what? I saw this in training. They get to practice, they spot it, they report it, they do whatever they're going to do with it. If they do mess up, it's not the end of your network. It's not causing you to be working weekends, right? That was always very important to me. What is the the odds that I'm going to work a weekend over this? So what that does is, again, it allows them to kind of do that, and it keeps it fresh in their mind. They remember how to do that. It's much like in my military career, doing drills, right? You learn to do these things. You do it a whole lot of times, more times than you ever think you needed to do it. But the whole idea behind that is to get it so that when the world is going on around you, you know, when things are happening and it's stressful situations, say end of month for your accounting folks and all that, they have a reaction to that that's reflexive as opposed to very slow. So you just keep doing that through the drilling. Makes a huge difference if you put these things together, really increases the effectiveness. Now, again, I mentioned this earlier, the Phish Alert button, great tool. Again, free, you don't have to be a customer or anything. The DBIR in 2017 said, you know, train your employees with regard to phishing, provide them a quick and easy way to report suspicious emails. I'm telling you, this is a very important thing. What I like about this is too, when you're training folks, when you're doing these sorts of things, you want to give them positive reinforcement. So if you are one of our users and they report one of these phishing links that we've sent out through our platform, it actually pops up and congratulates them, says, hey, good job spotting that, you know. Gives them a little positive reinforcement, a little pat on the back there. So I really like this tool. Whether you use ours, whether you use another one, give them something to report these. It really can help you in your organization. Now, the 4 steps we like to use, this just works, right? And this is doing it yourself, doing it whatever. These 4 steps will help you with success in this. First of all, you get a baseline test. This really helps you know where you're from. We can do this for you free also. Up to 100 users. Again, don't have to be a customer. We'll take care of that, no problem. But this gives you an idea of where you are. What is your baseline percentage for click rates? Then you train them on those things. You give them a chance to learn about this. Teach them how to spot these phishing emails, especially. We use 22 red flags. Basically, it comes down to, did I get an email at 2 o'clock in the morning from my HR department on a Saturday? And is that unusual? Maybe I ought to pay a little more attention to this one, right? Or does it elicit a strong emotional response? I should take a look at this. See, does it, does the hyperlink match when I hover it? Those sorts of things. Anyways, so you train them and then you do that phishing. Again, they get a chance to test themselves, and then you see the results. As they get better with the phishing tests, make them tougher. And don't be afraid to tell them too. Don't be afraid to say, hey, you guys are doing such a great job with this. We're going to have to up our game a little bit. So we're going to make them a little bit tougher. If you have that baseline, if it comes in high, 30, 40% click rates, which is unfortunately not horribly unusual, you may want to start them off with the easier ones, the ones that build that confidence, and then start moving pretty rapidly. But you just keep rotating those last 2, and maybe once a quarter, throw in that other quick training. And it is very, very impactful how this works with the people. Now, when it comes to phishing like the bad guys, some of the things you do want to do when you do that phishing is randomize it. Don't send them all out at the same time. You get the prairie dogging. They pop up and they go, hey, don't click on that Amazon one. It's one of the ones from our folks. They catch on to that very, very quickly. So what we do is we allow people to send a random email to a random user at a random time. So if somebody pops up and says, don't click on that one, well, that's great, because these other people may not have ever seen it, or they may never see it. So that's a good thing to keep that from happening. The second thing is you got to personalize them. Just using their first name, that's not enough anymore. Every marketer in the world does that. Take it a little further. Make the attachments something that's enticing. Q4 payroll, Q1 layoffs, bonuses, whatever it is. Make it look like they were accidentally CC'd on something going to their boss. Make it look like they were, it was a mistake. You can do that. I wouldn't do that right away if you have a fairly high click rate, because you don't want to frustrate people. But think about that as you're moving into this, because the attackers are definitely doing that. Now, as far as effectiveness goes, it's mind-boggling. I used to be one of those people that believed you couldn't train users until, earlier on in my career. I started applying some different principles, some of the stuff that we're talking about here, getting people involved, making it relevant to them. And I realized very quickly just how effective this can be. And that's why I love this. We did a study, 6 million users, 11,000 organizations. This was a huge chunk of the users. Basically, the limitations here were they had to do phishing at least monthly, and they had to do their training. Okay, it was very, very limited how we broke this out. But these same 6 million users, overall average 27% click rate. 3 months later, that's about 90 days, and that means they did their training, and maybe 1 or 2 of those simulated phishing attacks. They got about 13% click rate. That's reducing the risk in half. That's a pretty powerful thing right there. What's really mind-boggling is if you look down there 12 months later, it was those same 6 million people were 2%. The other thing about that's not telling is those emails are typically tougher than the ones at 27%. Because remember what I said about make them tougher? As they get better, make them a little bit tougher. You see some of that plateau there between like the 6 and 8 months. Your click rate will probably go up briefly, and then it's going to come right back down. And they're becoming more effective with the tougher emails. So it's even better than what it looks like there. So don't discount how much of an impact training your users can have on these sorts of attacks. And of course, these attacks are the primary way we're spreading ransomware, we're spreading malware, we're spreading crypto miners, all of that stuff. So really, If you're not doing something right now, do something in your organization to tackle the human element. Now, I'm going to share a couple of resources here with you. We do have a ransomware simulator, which is really cool. There's actually a brand new version out. I think it's coming out like today or maybe yesterday. It's coming out. This checks a bunch of different ransomware infection scenarios. The new one even runs a crypto miner to see if your endpoint protection can spot that. Sometimes we find that people need to tweak their endpoint protection, make some adjustments to what's there. Maybe things got upgraded, they didn't enable some new features. We see that sort of stuff. So this is there to help you tune your endpoint protection. So if somebody does mess up and click, hopefully it won't go too bad. We got the fish alert button on there, the ransomware hostage rescue manual, that's available for download in the handouts here. I recommend everybody just take a quick look at some of those sorts of things. So with that being said, I want to say thank you very much for listening. That's all I have for slides, but if I'm not mistaken, we may have a couple of questions here from the audience.
Yes, we do, and thank you, Eric. This was excellent. Yeah, let's answer the live audience questions that are coming in. And as a quick reminder for our viewers, we do want to hear from you. So please send us your questions through your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will address as many questions as time permits. All right, let's see. Eric, the first question, I have antivirus on my workstations. Shouldn't this protect me against ransomware?
Yeah, you know, that's a common thing, and endpoint protection is important to have out there. Some are definitely better than others. What's important about endpoint protection and what's important to understand is it's not going to catch it all. Just like anything else, this is all layers of defense, right? Training your people isn't going to 100% stop anyone from clicking on anything, but neither is any other security control you have in place, including endpoint protection. It kind of ebbs and flows depending on whether or not there's fresh strains out there. If somebody's released a new version, sometimes it takes a while for them to pick that up. And I will say, if you're depending on endpoint protection, one of the statements that I will make these days is if your endpoint protection is signature based and that's it, it's not going to do you much good. You have to have endpoint protection that employs some heuristics or AI or whatever you want to call it, sort of additional steps other than just virus signatures, because the way that they change these, the way that these strains are constantly being updated and tweaked and worked to get around that kind of stuff, it can leave you open for far too long when these go out there.
Excellent, thank you, Eric. The next question, should you have different awareness training lessons for different employees and departments?
That's one I get asked a lot too. And the answer that I have on this is I firmly believe that everybody in your organization needs to have the same base training. That helps it resonate, that helps build a culture in the organization, as opposed to everyone just getting little pieces. However, I also do think that there are teams and groups that need to have a little bit of extra, more personalized training, if you will, or more applicable training. Obviously, if you have people that are dealing with credit card numbers, PCI is a requirement. But if you have people that never touch that stuff, you may not want to do that or spend the time. But, your HR folks are often targets for things like business email compromise, CEO fraud, W-2 fraud. Your leadership needs to understand that odds are they're going to be spoofed in an attack to one of these other departments, your finance, your HR, one of those sorts of groups. So those folks need to have some additional training, and it doesn't have to be, super in-depth, another hour of training or something. But again, some of those micro modules, maybe 3, 5, 10 minutes, that's on these sorts of attacks that are very specific to those areas of your organization. So again, a short answer, everybody needs the basics, but yeah, you may need to go a little bit above and beyond for those that are going to be really targeted in these attacks.
Very good. The next question, how can you determine how vulnerable your network is against a ransomware attack?
Quite frankly, I think that ransom tool is fantastic for that. That's a great way to check your endpoint protection, your configurations, especially if you do something like, a golden master sort of idea where everything's based off the same image. It's a great tool for doing those sorts of things. Also, think like an attacker. Look at your network infrastructure as the eyes of an attacker. If I got into this computer, where could I get from here? What other machines could I connect to? What other sorts of things? What's in my way to keep me from moving from here? So you take that mindset, you start looking at your architecture and how things are set up. Look at, do I need to segment these things? Breaking down that side of things. That's my recommendation on that.
Thank you, Eric. I think we have time for one more question. And the question is about, what paths does ransomware take to get into an organization's IT systems?
Yeah, so, if we're talking paths as in attack vectors here, phishing, big one. Another huge one that's been very successful is Remote Desktop Protocol, or JBoss, published to the internet. Okay, there's a group out there called SamSam, and they are very, very good at getting through remote access sorts of things that are published directly to the internet. So they brute force RDP. That's Windows devices 3389 is the port number there. Don't think you're clever by moving it to 3390. They will still find it. These guys are really good at doing that. So other than the human side, those remote access protocols are very susceptible to that. My recommendation is VPN first and then do a remote desktop if you need to do that. I understand it's very convenient, it's very useful. VPNs are not something that's difficult to put in place these days and secure through certificates and things like that. They're very robust, they're easy to manage. There's really no reason to have one of those RDP ports published directly to the internet anymore.
With this, we're at the finish line for today's session. As we're closing this webinar, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Eric, many thanks to you for sharing your insights on how to defend against ransomware attacks. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this concludes today's session. I hope we will see all of you again at one of our future webinars. Thanks, everyone.